you briefly about your final paper for the course. So I'll just briefly go through the rubric, and I also reference a table on the rubric, which I don't think I've actually shared with you. So I will also go through the table to help you make sense of this final paper. I will say, though, that and I think I mentioned this in my last email, every research project is so different, and there's so many different ways to approach it. So I'm giving you kind of a general overview of the steps that I would take to get started, but I'm not saying that this is all the work that you'll have to do to really be able to come up with your findings and figure out what your findings mean. Really, it's a process of just kind of looking at, your data, looking at those themes that you came up with and figuring out what they mean, and then figuring out what other people have said about the same things, and then thinking about what that means. So with that said, let's go through the rubric. Just make this a little bit bigger. All right, so basically you're going to use your data analysis from assignment 3 to develop findings and answer your research questions. So assignment 3, you took your raw data and you basically have distilled it down, and you've come up with these themes or these big ideas that were present in your data. Now that you should have themes or kind of these big ideas from 2 different sources. You may have your survey and an interview. Some of you may have your focus groups and observations, but you should have kind of 2 different sources of data. What we want to do for assignment 4 is we want to take those 2 different sources of data, put them together with the research questions, think about the research problem, and figure out what all this means together. All right, so since you kind of have a sense of where we're going, let's flip over to the table that I was referencing. Uh-oh. I've got 2 of the same thing and not what I'm looking for. There we go. All right, so here's the table. First column is your research questions. I have research question 1. In this box, I would just put in your research question 1, this box, and then put in research question 2, and then beyond the research questions, we'll come back to this particular idea. So here, I would list out, your themes from data source 1. What are the themes or your big ideas? If you had let's say a survey, you may have done content analysis a little bit differently, so you may not have called what you came up with themes, but you still should have some big ideas or some patterns that you saw in your data. And then over here, themes from data source 2, put in your themes, your big ideas from data source 2. Once you have that, you want to just kind of stop and take a look at what you have. And then stop and take a look at what you have from your research question to the themes from source 1 to the themes from source 2. How do you put those ideas together? How do the themes from data source 1 speak to research question 1? How do the themes from data source 2 speak to research question 1? How do the themes from each of the different data sources speak to each other? How are you putting these ideas together? And here's where it gets messy. There's no step 1, step 2, step 3. It's really just you looking at the data, looking at what your participants said or what you observed, and making sense of it. So once you've kind of taken themes from data source 1 and data source 2, you come up with findings. And one of the chapters that I sent, I think really does a great job, and I'm losing the name of it, but it'll come back to me, of really kind of walking you through this step. And actually, the quote is coming from that particular chapter, if I find this. Basically, your findings are a statement of, what your themes are in relationship to the research question. I don't want to give you an example because the way you state your findings can vary, but it's not just theme. Like, for example, maybe one of your themes might be something like, all of the participants discuss their family as being important for their decision to apply to a school. They really consider their family. So if that was your theme, then what does that mean in relationship to the research question? Well, the way you state that theme is going to differ depending on what that research question is and how you're using those themes to help you answer the research question. So your findings are kind of like, okay, this is how I'm using the themes to answer this particular research question. So you should have a list of findings. The other important thing to remember is your findings really combine themes one and themes, or themes from data source one and themes from data source two. It may be that the themes don't line up. It may be that you have to talk about the themes from data source one separately from the themes from data source two. But it may be that they actually do line up and they are speaking to each other. That's another thing that you're going to have to consider. And there's no way for me to know without looking at your data how those things are going to line up. So I'm sure you've heard the sentiment of, you know your data better than anyone else. And that's true. I mean, at this point, you've spent time in the field collecting the data. You've spent time with participants, or you've spent time with what participants have told you, and you're really just going to kind of have to make sense of it. Okay, so once you have your findings, your kind of answers, if you will, to your research questions, then you need to go to the literature. Basically, you're doing a literature search for the kind of answers that you came up with. Again, there's no magic solution or quick way to do this either. Basically, it's you doing some searches. You may be somewhat familiar with the literature if you've already been studying this or taking a look at this. But you want to think about, what has already been said about whatever it is that you're studying. Most of the time, the things that are coming from our data isn't going to be completely new. Maybe somebody else has done a similar study and had similar findings, or there's similar ideas out there. For this particular course, I'm not expecting you to know all of the ideas related to what you're studying, but you should be able to find some ideas. Some types of connection to the literature. This also goes for your theoretical framing. Some of the themes that you list that emerge from your theoretical framework, you should have done a layer of coding specifically from your theoretical framework, might actually, the theory is going to speak to those particular items anyway, but you want to make those connections in that citation column. Really reference back to the theory, back to the literature that supports the ideas, or maybe the literature kind of contradicts, what you found. If that's true, then you also want to find that information as well. So once you have, your findings, your kind of answers to your research question based on your data, and you have what the literature says, then you have to figure out, okay, well, what does this mean? Well, if I find that, when families make decisions about attending school or applying to a particular school, they base it on their families and what their families need, I need to go to the literature on school enrollment, school application to see what's said there. And if I find that, this is a typical thing, this isn't rocket science. Everybody knows, well, not everybody knows, but in the literature it says family is a huge consideration. Then you have to ask yourself, well, what does that tell you? My findings are saying that, family is important. The literature says that family is important. So what does this mean for me? It means that, family is important. Family should be considered as, the team is deciding, what our priorities are, or given that family is so important, we should consider this in our research problem. Now, as you're looking at the chapter, there's a fine line, I think, between interpreting what your research, what your findings mean, and then making implications. So here you're just really kind of trying to say, okay, this is what this finding means. You're unpacking it. You're not making suggestions for practice. You're not saying this is what we need to do. You're not saying, this is what we need to study next. Those would be implications. You're really trying to dig into, what's being said, what all of this means. And again, the chapters are going to be really helpful for you in kind of sorting out, how to create an interpretation. The other thing to think about as you're trying to interpret all of this is go back to your problem statement. Remember, there was a problem that we were trying to address in the very beginning of all this. So, given what you found, what does this mean? How do you understand this in terms of your particular research problem? And so this table is kind of it's to get you started. I'm not saying that this is all you're going to have to do in terms of your thinking and arranging your ideas, but hopefully this kind of helps you see all of the different pieces that you're going to have to think through and make sense of. All right, so with that said, let's jump back to the assignment. All right, so the first thing that you're going to do is you're going to restate your research problem and your research questions in the introductory paragraph. Bring us back into the whole reason why we began this study in the first place. What were the challenges, issues, concerns that you started with? And how did you hone that problem into questions that you were going to explore this particular summer? Then after you do that, you're going to state your findings. So if you've kind of gone through this thought process where you have findings, you go ahead and say them and you describe how they speak to your research questions. I would anticipate that you may need at least a few sentences to explain each finding. I don't think this is I wouldn't put all of your findings and all of your connections to the research questions into one paragraph. You definitely may want to use subheadings for this, maybe a subheading for research question 1, subheading for research question 2, findings for research question 1, findings for research question 2, and then you want to really, talk about those themes, give some examples from your data. Share some quotations with us, prove, what you believe about your findings. Don't just, I'm not just going to take your word for it. Give me the data, show me the data that suggests that what you're saying related to your themes is true. You may even want to say, again, going back to my example of, family being important, related to admissions decisions and enrollment, give me the quotes that say that. Or if you have a survey, show me, 75% of participants believe that, or give me the information. If you're doing observations, tell me what you observed. So basically in your findings, you're really kind of connecting it to your research questions. You're giving me examples from the data. And I think the part about showing us and not just telling us is really important. You could be telling me anything. You could tell me whatever you want me to believe about your data, but I don't believe you until you show me what you've done. And I think that's another one of the skills that's really important of doctoral level research. Anybody can tell us what they think, but you have the data to prove it. So make sure you're incorporating the data into that findings section. All right, so once you have the findings section written up, you want to make sure that you're connecting each finding to literature and to theory. And I'm gonna give you some freedom here with how you organize this. Some people might find it easier to take each finding at a time, do your finding, show us the data, connect it to literature, all in one section. That's fine. Some people might find it easier to do the section on findings, then do the section on the literature. It doesn't matter to me, whatever makes the most sense for you, as long as it's organized. So connect it with the literature. Tell us what all of that means. And again, remember to go back to your research questions when you're thinking about what this means. Go back to your research problem when you're thinking about what does all of this mean. And then after you've done that for all of your findings, you want to go back to this idea of case study. Think about why case study was a helpful methodology for the project. You want to go back to the definition of case study. We did a very small portion of a case study. If you were doing this as your dissertation, there would be much more data, many more pieces, many more voices in all of this. But given what you've done so far, begin to think about why this is a helpful method. Think about the strengths, think about the limitations. And then I want you to think about your process as a scholar practitioner this summer in the research process. What did you learn about yourself? What did you learn about studies that you're going to use in the future? Some of you had some challenges with your data, things that didn't work out the way you anticipated that they would work out with your design and with the data that you actually got. Here is the place to kind of own that. If you had weaknesses in your analysis, if you had weaknesses in your in the design of your data collection guides, go ahead and talk about those things here. Again, my goal is not perfection, but my goal is that you learn and that you continue finding ways to improve your skill set. So if you feel like, oh no, I didn't get this exactly where I wanted it to be, then talk about it here. And talk about why it wasn't what you wanted and how you could have improved it, or how you can improve on that in the future. And then finally, this is an academic paper. Make sure you use subheadings, use references, reference your data, and think about the organization of paragraphs and the entire paper overall. I say it should be about 5 to 7 pages. That's really just a guesstimate. You may be over 7 pages. If so, then that's fine. If you're under 5 pages, then shoot me an email or something. I just want to make sure that you have everything that you need. And I'm guessing that in order to explain all of this, it's going to take at least 5 pages, but I'm not really sure, and so I'll own that. But if you're way under 5, just shoot me an email and let me know, and then I can make sure that you have everything you need, or if I need to adjust kind of my expectations of what should be there. So hopefully that helps unpack this a little bit. Again, I think the readings will be really helpful for making everything a little bit more clear. And once you get into your data, it will be a lot more clear. So I think that this is probably a lot of, well, for a lot of folks anyway, the fun part, trying to figure out what makes sense, what does this say about my research questions, what does this say about my research problem. And then I should also say, you may not have the complete answers to your research questions, especially because you only collected a little bit of data. So the other thing to be thinking about is, what additional data, should I have collected, or would I want to collect, because you'll have an opportunity to do that next term. But just kind of be thinking about, where everything falls for you, and how everything that you've done, everything that you learned is helping you make sense of that research problem and your research questions. Again, if you have questions, or if you want to walk through any of your examples, if you have specific questions about your specific data, then that's fine. I'd be glad to help you with it. If you ask me a question about your data, be sure you send me your research questions, because for me, that's what everything goes back to. It's hard for me to interpret the data that you collect, your analysis, any of those things, without understanding what your research questions are. Because at the end of the day, that's the goal of a research study, is to answer your research questions. Oh, and that reminds me, there was one other part of this table that I said I would come back to beyond the research questions. So there may be things that you find that are actually that can't be housed within those research questions. And I think that that's also okay. If you've kind of gone through the analysis over and over again, and it's not connecting, you have pieces that are not connecting, themes that are not connecting, I actually think that that's cool, because sometimes as researchers, at least my belief as an interpretivist researcher, is that sometimes we don't know the best research questions to ask when we begin a study. So what you've uncovered might be that, there are other questions or other information that's really important to understanding that research problem that we had no way of knowing without collecting the data. So if there are pieces out there that, just don't fit with the research questions, that's great. Stick them in this part beyond the research questions, and you can incorporate that into your paper as well. You just don't want to put it under the section about research question 1 and research question 2. You could even have a section kind of beyond the research questions, additional thoughts. I mean, I want you to make sure that you answer everything that's in the rubric, but there may be other things out there that are really key to what you learned this summer. Put those in the paper too, so that way you have kind of a record of your thinking process and your learning. All right, please be in touch with questions, and I will talk to you guys soon.